Today I'm presenting for you the art of finding biological solutions for a happier, healthier life. Hi, I'm Andi Locke Mears, and I'm very grateful to the Global GHK group for inviting me to speak this year honoring World GHK Day. Let me share my screen. What is a biological solution? When we're talking about finding a biological solution, we need to understand what that really means. We have to then go back to understand that we experience conflict shocks, and it's not just any type of trauma. It's a biological conflict shock. We see a hammer focus in the brain, and your psyche, brain, and organ is very busy. It turns on a biological program that changes a part of your anatomy, an organ, a tissue, to assist you in that moment. At some point during this, you will have symptoms, and those are given labels of disease. Once we know and understand GHK Heilkunde, we understand why that particular program was turned on, how it will progress, and how it naturally finishes. Unfortunately, the program can continue on and on due to conflict relapses. This is what a chronic condition is. Conflict relapses that keep you on that hamster wheel. The challenge then is to learn this knowledge and to figure out how to solve these once and for all. We instinctively know how to resolve our biological programs. If you've ever had the common cold, then you've done this. You've had a conflict shock, you solved it, and then you finished the PCL or the healing phase, which is the cold. Most people don't correlate all this, but if you know GHK, when you start to have cold symptoms, the sniffles, congestion, then you know darned well you just solved a conflict shock. Can you remember how you did this? It would be fabulous data for you to go back and try to remember the last time you had a cold. Analyze it. It gives you data on how you find biological solutions, how your mind works, and how you reach your psyche, brain, organ. So how do we make that process conscious? Right now, because of the knowledge of how most of us are raised, it's fairly unconscious. This is what we need to change so we can be more empowered. When you start to learn GHK Heilkunde, you wonder, how do I do this? How do I take this knowledge and use it? What's the therapy here? GHK has been accused of not having any therapy, and yet it most definitely does. Dr. Hammer said the therapy is in the knowledge. The key is that you have to understand how to take the knowledge and use it as therapy. It is a causative therapy. In other words, it addresses the very cause of what started the biological program. Oh, sure, you can take remedy after remedy, pill after pill, therapy after therapy, and they sometimes reduce symptoms for a while, and there's definitely a time and a place where this is important to do so. Yet these are not biological solutions. I've had clients who have spent hundreds of dollars a month on supplements, or they do expensive therapies and that don't make a whole lot of difference, or they spend, again, thousands of dollars working with healthcare providers and practitioners, physicians, who really don't help them in the long run. And when they tire of that rat race, many find their way to GHK Heilkunde. They learn it, and then they find their own biological solutions. And they're so appreciative when they do. They get off that merry-go-round of supplements and therapies. Let's look at some preliminary steps one might take. We start with the physical symptoms. We always start with the physical symptoms. You have a cough, a sore shoulder, gallbladder pain, etc. You have to have enough knowledge to figure out what the body part is from a GHK Heilkunde perspective. So you use all the resources at your disposal. Look up cough, sore shoulder, gallbladder, etc. Most organs have more than one SBS, more than one biological program within the organ, so you have to look at each one to determine which part has the symptom that you have. This takes time to learn the research skills you will need on how to do this, and also anatomy and physiology training is certainly helpful. It's easier to translate medical language and anatomy and physiology language into what I call GHKEs. I will say practice makes perfect. When I started with Gemenische Heilkunde, I did this easily 20 times a day. I kept looking everything up I could. Clients who came in, celebrities with a diagnosis, diseases in movies. I looked it all up. I learned how to figure out the body part, and thus the SBS, the biological program, and this was invaluable experience for me. You now have a specific body part, which means you've discovered the SBS. What program is running? Read everything you can in English and then confirm it with a German resource, which means you're using Google Translate or DeepL or one of the other translation softwares. Really important to do that. You must then determine if you're in the conflict active or the PCL phase, the healing phase. And you need to know what occurs in the entire program, the entire SBS, including hanging healings. Next, you look at the timeline. Keep a high view here and figure out your timeline. What was going on in your life around that time that you had the symptom or just before it? This is important, and spend time here. Talk with a friend or loved one who can be a mirror for you. You're trying to discover the content of your DHS, your conflict shock. What happened? Who was involved? How did you feel? Once you have a handle on that, you normally have enough information to determine the biological solution. Finding a biological solution often involves doing the opposite. Well, what does that mean? Take your conflict content, what you've just figured out. Your partner left you. Maybe your house burned down. Maybe you were fired from your job. Look at your circumstances and all the elements that were involved. And then find the opposite action. What will undo this conflict shock and allow the weight of it to fall from your shoulders? Or, as the Germans say, let the stone fall from your soul. Let's look at an example. We have a 75-year-old man who's right dominant. He was diagnosed with Parkinson's after retiring. His right arm would tremble more than the left. He had once been a conductor of a large professional orchestra before retirement. After retirement, he's been leading a small folk music ensemble. Unfortunately, the musicians in the folk ensemble were amateurs, and he felt their skills were terribly disappointing. This was his motor conflict, that he couldn't properly conduct these musicians with his right arm since they weren't good enough in his opinion. To find a biological solution to this conflict, he was asked to conduct his favorite march right there in the office of the G&M GHK consultant and to conduct it for 2 to 3 minutes. And the conductor said, no, the march lasts for 3 minutes and 14 seconds. Okay, so he agreed to conduct it on the spot. He stood up and he started conducting it. And out of curiosity, the consultant kept an eye on the time. Without music, the man began conducting with a passion. The final note took place at 3 minutes and 14 seconds. And they both looked at his arms, which were calm. Everything about him was calm. His tremor never returned. That was doing the opposite. He didn't have to have the full orchestra to finish this. Without the music playing, he could just get into the mood, the ambiance, and he had the muscle memory and sensory memory, so when he conducted right then and there, the biological program was finished. Your psyche does not know the difference between real and imaginary. So this was real. The original conflict content was that he couldn't conduct these amateur musicians, so he did the opposite. In his mind's eye, he was conducting them to his standards, and when he did, the program finished. The track was gone. That track is that thing that causes a conflict relapse. In this case, his track was his frustration of not being able to conduct effectively. Once he did, he got off the track and had no more tremors. This is what I mean by do the opposite. Let's look at the steps you'd have to take to do the opposite. First, what happened with your DHS? What can you remember? What was distressing? It had to fit 3 criteria. It was distressing, isolative, and you were caught on the wrong foot. So what happened? Write everything down or process it out loud with someone. If you can't remember much, then get some help. Go to someone in your family, a neighbor, a friend, somebody who was there at that time or who knows you well. Just get some help. Talk it through with somebody who knows you. If your biological conflict shock occurred in utero or when you were very, very young, again, go to your family, go to someone who would understand the circumstances of your family's life at that time. What was it like when your mom was pregnant? And if you're adopted, what do you know about your adoption? Do you know anything? I'll bet you've imagined a lot. What you do know is your mom chose to find you a different home. So that may be all you need to find your biological solution. I've literally found a biological solution without knowing what program was running or knowing what my DHS was. This is entirely possible. I've done it more than once. That being said, if you can find out what your DHS was, your original biological conflict shock, that is fabulous. Once you've figured that out, then take a look at the sensory information that was part of the DHS. Your sight, smell, touch, hearing, weather, food, anything that was around you that your senses were focused on. Were you eating dinner? Were you swimming in the ocean? Chances are you'll have enough data to find a biological solution. Next, brainstorm solutions. I would say do this with a loved one or a friend or a GHK therapist or consultant. Processing this with someone else, I have found it to be a very important element. Have somebody on this journey with you. Have a witness, if you will. I think it helps your psyche. Let's say you brainstorm the opposite. You know what your DHS was, the sensory information, you figure out a solution, and you do it, and it doesn't work. Well, then something is missing. Some key element hasn't been included. What else can you do? Again, talk it through with someone, preferably someone who knows you well. Come up with the most obvious biological solution and implement that. And then do it again if you need to. You shouldn't have to do it too many times, though. Find a solution and implement it. Let's say you find the perfect biological solution and you don't want to do it. It involves leaving your spouse, changing jobs, moving across the country. If your biological solution feels insurmountable, then you can work with your tracks instead. When you experience a conflict shock, your mind is super aware. And if you've ever had a huge shock, you've felt this. It feels like time is standing still. You feel stunned. You can't even think straight as you comprehend what just happened. Our subconscious is highly acute, and it picks up on all the sensory impressions which are currently being perceived by us, and our brain takes a snapshot of all of it. It then stores it in the brain. What are the feelings, emotions? Are you at work, at home, barometric pressure, the weather, the season, if you're smelling mold or ragweed, if you're just sitting around watching TV and eating pizza with your friends, you just patted the dog or the cat, you just ate peanut butter. All of these are sensory impressions. These are all stored at that moment of the conflict shock. These elements leave imprints in us, and we call those tracks, and any one of them can set the program in motion. It's like being on a railroad track. Right here, you're moving forward, but you're moving forward in a circle. You're stuck. You're stuck on that hamster wheel. The original conflict is the primary track, and all of these sensory impressions are then stored as secondary tracks. Thus, if the original conflict was when you were 4 years old, and you were separated at the local carnival from your parents due to the crowds of people there, you were probably pretty terrified and had perhaps a separation conflict, and began losing cells in your epidermis. Maybe it's right on the shoulder where your parents were holding on to you. This is the main track then. Let's say you were eating popcorn at the carnival when this occurred. Your senses, and thus your brain, know that you were eating popcorn. Your biology is focused on chewing it, swallowing it, digesting it. The popcorn becomes the secondary track, and you start running the indigestible anger conflict, which means anytime you eat corn and you run the small intestine program and you get constipation and then diarrhea. This literally means you're allergic to being separated from your parents in a crowd, and you now have two biological programs that turn on when you have that same feeling of being away from your parents, or maybe the next time you go to the carnival. Oftentimes, when you've had a hanging healing for years and years, the original conflict is resolved. However, you are keeping it active because of the associations you have with it, the beliefs and identities you've accepted about yourself as truth. I was a bad girl. I'm so stupid. I have a bad back. I was the troublemaker in the family. I still am. I've had this for so long, I doubt I'll ever be well. I've had cancer 3 times. I'll probably get it again. These will keep you stuck more than anything else. These beliefs and identities. You've given up hope because nothing has worked, and nothing has worked because you haven't used Gemenische Heilkunde yet. All your fears, doubts, identities with a diagnosis. I've had cancer 3 times. I'll probably get it again. All of these can be tracks that simply keep you stuck on that hamster wheel. You're going around and around. What if you were very young when you had this DHS, the unexpected biological shock? Let's say your parents divorced when you were 3 and you don't remember much. I would ask you if you remember anything, and if so, we use that to find a biological solution. Let's say you remember your mother yelled. We'll use that. That might be enough. Maybe you don't even remember that. But maybe you know you moved out with your mom. Now, and as an adult, how do you think you felt back then? You know yourself. Would you have been scared? Angry? This is all we need to find a biological solution. Or, let's say your symptoms began after your divorce 2 years ago. We would explore your divorce. What was it like for you? Let's say it was humiliating for you and you lost all your friends. So a track now is that every time you see one of your former friends, you have a conflict relapse. Your former friends are your tracks. What's a biological solution? What's the obvious one here? This is not hard to figure out. The obvious biological solution is get new friends. But let's say you can't seem to avoid the old ones. Avoiding a track can be the simplest and easiest solution, and it really is a solution. Animals do this all the time. If a horse lower on the totem pole gets picked on by the boss mare, that horse will intentionally avoid the boss mare. If these former friends of yours are tracks, avoiding them altogether is a valid solution. However, if you can't, then can you change your mind, change your perspective, or change your beliefs about them? Can you remember an aspect of their prior friendship fondly and focus on that instead of the discontent that comes up when you see them? This is where you brainstorm ideas to change your mind, your perspective, your beliefs. Let's say your track is your boss at work. This is where animals are more intelligent than we are. Animals will avoid the boss, but us, we keep going back to work day after day, stepping on a track day after day while we have 1, 2, 3 chronic conditions because of this. So what can we do? We keep exposing ourselves to our track because we think we have to, but we don't. Avoiding the track by getting a new job, which is valid, is a wonderful biological solution. And the plus side is that you'll be healthier because your chronic conditions will hopefully finish. Avoiding the tracks, thus, is a biological solution. If you can't, let's say your track is your older sibling, your mother, your child. How can you change your perspective then on this person? That process is unique to everyone. Look at your past. When have you ever changed your mind or your perspective or beliefs in the past? Examine how you did this. You've done this a zillion times without conscious thought. Now make it conscious. Maybe you have a trusted friend or a parent, and when you talk with them, your perspective often changes. When I was a young adult making my way in the world, I would often talk with my mother, that one person on the planet who knew me better than anyone, and after talking with her, I would usually have an entirely different perspective on my dilemma of the day. So to work with your tracks, you need to know what they are, and how do you find them? You need to put on your Sherlock Holmes hat and do some detective work. First, you develop the timeline. When did your symptoms start? When are your symptoms better and when are they worse? Consider the time of day, the day of the week, the season, the weather, who is with you, what you just thought, what you just ate, what you just did, what you just smelled, all of it, all the sensory data you can think of. Keep a symptom diary to help you determine all this. That can be very helpful. If this process feels daunting, get some help from family members, coworkers, close friends, a sibling. They are often the best resources, and they observe and remember things that we don't. Let's look more at figuring out the timeline. If your symptom occurs every weekend, then that means the trigger is at work during the week. If the symptom is worse every Thursday, then look at what happens every Wednesday. If your symptoms are seasonal, such as springtime allergies, that means your psyche is picking up on the season and the conflict that happened 8 years ago in the springtime, and it's now trying to keep you safe. Let your body be your guide. Maybe your symptoms are worse every morning. So what happens every night? For myself, I had a low mid back pain every morning around 4 o'clock in the morning, and it was so painful it would wake me up. Once I learned GHK Heilkunde, I became a detective. What is this all about? And I'll share that story soon. If you're stuck on developing your timeline, if it's just not coming together for you, consider either attending a teleconference call or schedule a one-on-one session with a GHK consultant or teacher. That can be helpful to get you past stumbling blocks here. You will see a pattern emerge. So use that to figure out what your tracks are, what turns it on. Once you see this pattern, your pattern, sometimes all the tracks will disappear and you're done with your chronic condition. Sometimes you have to go further and actively, consciously change your mind, your perspective, or your beliefs about your track and your circumstance, and that will take some diligence and mindfulness on your part, but it is definitely doable. Immediately remember a good time you had with this person. You're walking down the street, you see one of your former friends, and immediately start thinking of a good time you had with them and dwell on that for a few moments. Or immediately think of a good quality this person has and dwell on that for a few moments. Or call your best friend to talk. In this case, you're simply distracting your mind. When you distract your mind effectively, you can often downgrade that track very quickly. Your solution is unique to you. No one solution is the same from person to person, and no one can give you your perfect biological solution. GHK knowledgeable people can guide you along the path to find it, though. And yet, ultimately, you are the one who needs to find the solution because you are the expert on you. There are 8 billion people on this planet. There are 8 billion solutions. Those of us who work with GHK Heilkunde, we understand the process of how solutions are figured out, and any one of us can guide you on this path. But again, you are the one ultimately who knows what your psyche needs more than anyone else. I want to close with my own story of how I finished that low mid-back pain. I had to put my detective hat on. What was my timeline? What was my pattern? I had low mid-back pain almost every morning around 4 o'clock in the morning, and it would wake me up. The pain reduced as the day progressed, and it was gone by mid to late afternoon. So that's my timeline. Now I have to go back, well, when was the resolution? If the healing phase is at 4 o'clock, the resolution is prior to that, which means I probably stepped on a track prior to that, maybe in the evening before. So what did I do? I looked at what happened every evening. I had a wellness center at the time, and I worked long, hard days, and I was very tired and hungry when I got home, and I still had to cook dinner, and I really didn't want to. My husband at that time did not cook, and while he had been home for 4 hours, I did resent the fact that I had to make dinner. So now that I started to see what my distressing events were on a nightly basis, that I was literally turning this DHS on with my thoughts and my emotions, I had to explore how to turn it off. What did I do? I had to do the opposite. I didn't want to cook dinner. What's the opposite of that, other than eating at a restaurant every night or getting takeout every night, which I really didn't want to do? Well, I could ask him to help, and I did that. Or I could prepare food on the weekend that he could heat during the week, and he was more than willing to do that. But I couldn't always do these. They just didn't work. I tried them. So what was next? Well, then I have to change my perspective. I looked again at my behavior, my thoughts, my feelings. I was angry every night. I was frustrated. I wasn't a happy person. I was not glad to see my husband. I was tired and hungry. What is the opposite of this? I decided to focus on gratitudes. Gratitudes for all that my husband did for me. So when I came home the next night, I started to think about all the things he had just done in the previous few hours. He had mowed the lawn, and I was so grateful that he had done that. He had done all the laundry and folded it. That was wonderful. He also fed the cat. And so I went over these in my head over and over again like mantras, over and over again. The next morning, I did not wake up with pain. I continued my mantras, my gratitude mantras for the next 2 weeks. The pain never came back. Keep in mind, I did not know what my program was. I didn't know, was it my spine, connective tissue? Was it my kidney collecting tubules? I didn't know my DHS, my original conflict shock, nor my program that was running. And I still was able to solve this. So I want to point out how I simply had to go through that process and find that solution that would help me to change my perspective and not turn that track on again. So moving forward, you always have 2 possibilities. Find a biological solution, or change your mind, your perspective, or your beliefs. And I recommend working with someone to help you get past any roadblocks that might come up. I hope this has been helpful. I want to thank you so much for this opportunity, for allowing me to present. I am always grateful to the Global GHK Group for all that they do to promote GNM GHK on this planet. The more we work together, the faster these beautiful and amazing discoveries of Dr. Hammer will reach more ears. Namaste. Have a wonderful rest of your day.